For Family by Nanook 888. Chapter 4. To Lift the Veil of Shadow. The instant the executor emerged from hyperspace, Vader sensed his son, a bright beacon that could be nobody else. Why was the boy still here? Vader huffed in frustration. Fortunately, his vocalizer was programmed to disregard non-vocal exhalation of air, and the bridge officers remained ignorant of their commander's disturbance. Space around Yavin 13 was already cluttered with chaotic dogfights interlaced with heavy turbo laser fire from the 8 Star Destroyers, as the Super Star Destroyer also began contributing to the deadly crossfire and added its own substantial complement of TIE fighters to the battle. The chances of survival for the rebel pilots became increasingly remote. As Vader surveyed the battle, he pinpointed Luke's force presence in an X-Wing, which led a random 3-ship formation with a Y-Wing and another X-Wing. He would have stopped breathing had it not been for his respirator when 2 TIE fighters picked up the trail of the 3 rebel starfighters. Never had Vader been so concerned with the welfare of another living being, and he was sorely inexperienced in dealing with the stomach-churning, heart-stopping feeling that gripped him. He stared transfixed, unable to watch and yet unable to look away as the ships tumbled and spun around each other. Just when he thought he would burst from all the tension building up inside, a second group of rebel ships swooped in and shot down the pursuing Imperial fighters in quick succession. He expelled a great sigh of relief. He didn't even care that in his capacity as the supreme commander of the Imperial forces, he was rooting for the wrong side. In what was left of his battered, withered heart, there was only one side, one person that mattered anymore. His relief, however, was short-lived. Luke was now spinning to evade being trapped by 3 TIE interceptors zeroing in from both sides, and Vader could take no more. He rounded on Piet.
"Send 2 pilots to my private hangar. You have the bridge, Admiral."
No one batted an eye as Vader stormed out. As well as being a brilliant strategist, the Sith Lord was famous for his custom of leading battles from the front line. It was one of the very few traits that his subordinates admired, rather than feared in him. The Millennium Falcon swerved around the hull of the Star Destroyer Avenger and spun to face backwards, continuing its previous trajectory. The 2 pursuing TIE fighters rounded the hull, where they were promptly dispatched by one of the Falcon's quad laser cannons. Lando's voice came over the comm. "4 more coming in, 0.35. 3PO could be heard bemoaning in the background, accompanied by unimpressed splats from R2. Distracted with thoughts of her last stint in the gun turret when Han had been in the cockpit, Leia had missed that second TIE fighter. It was fortunate that Chewie had caught it from his end. Han would never forgive her if she let his treasured ship be fried to a crisp. With a deep breath, she forced herself to focus on the battle at hand. A strange, crystal clear focus seemed to come over her, and this time when the TIE fighters zoomed across before her, they seemed to slow down, and she had ample time to catch them in the crosshairs of her targeting array and to press the trigger. One after another, all 4 exploded. "Wow, good shot." Leia glanced over her shoulder at the red-haired woman who had poked her head into the gun turret's access shaft. It was one of the stragglers they had picked up at the base, called Kara, as she had learned in their hasty introductions. Leia couldn't recall seeing her before, but there were always so many people coming and going, especially recently with the flood of new recruits. "You should stay buckled in," Leia warned. "It's not safe. You could get thrown." The woman didn't seem concerned. "Can I help?" she asked and grinned as Leia hesitated. "I used to do a fair bit of smuggling. I can handle a TIE fighter or 2. "I take it you can fly?" Leia asked. "Sure." "Then you could take over from 3PO in the cockpit. He's never been much of a co-pilot." "Great!" Kara said brightly and ducked back down into the ship. Vader's heavily modified TIE advanced, screamed out from the executor, and tore into the fray with 2 nervous pilots on his wing. The bulk of the experienced pilots had already proceeded to join the battle, and these were the best of what had remained of the reserve force. He knew his hand-picked Black 2 and Black 3 were also out there somewhere, but he purposefully kept the greener, more expendable pilots by his side as he closed in on his son. Despite Vader taking it easy, the 2 wingmen barely managed to keep pace. Luke spotted him as they approached and began leading his formation through increasingly erratic maneuvers in a bid to lose them.
"Split off and engage the 2 wingmen,"
Vader ordered over their private frequency, even knowing it would most likely cost the 2 inexperienced pilots their lives.
break them off from their leader.
If they were surprised at this command to break formation, they were too afraid to voice it. The TIE fighters veered off, then swung back to pepper the two rebel ships with laser fire from the side. As the X and Y wings spun away to evade fire, Vader burst straight through between them after Luke. With the formation broken, Luke launched off in a dizzying combination of evasive acrobatics, spinning and looping around other dogfights that tested the X-Wing's G-force capacity to the limit. His temporarily assigned R5 unit squealed in protest. He was a sullen droid, not even comparable to the chirpy brave R2. It was clear that Luke had previously been holding himself back to maintain formation with his two wingmen. Vader stuck right on his tail. With some considerable effort, he was proud to note.
You fly well, son,
he said mentally. Even as Vader sensed his son's joy at the compliment, Luke replied cheerfully, "Just trying to get away from you, father." Vader winced. His reply was interrupted by Wedge's voice over the X-Wing's comlink. "Rogue leader, we've dispatched the TIEs. Hold on, we're coming after you." "No, Wedge," Luke replied. "Take shore and gather as many others as you can. Target the interdictor shield generator." "You sure?" "We'll all be pulverized if we can't jump to light speed. Focus on that interdictor." "Right, boss," Wedge confirmed grimly. Through the dense mesh of spinning starfighters and laser fire flying in every direction, Luke caught a glimpse of Rogue 2 and Grave 5 peeling off towards the interdictor in the distance. When Vader sensed his son's attention to return to him, he was determined to put the record straight.
"I did not come to shoot you down."
"Of course not," Luke replied with light sarcasm. "That's why you're chasing me." He sent them spiraling past a TIE fighter that was careening out of control.
"Only to keep the other fighters away."
Vader sensed Luke's confusion and clarified.
"The others will recognize my ship and think I am after you personally, so they will not interfere. Better I chased you than someone who is trying to kill you."
Luke's bewilderment only intensified. "Since when are you not trying to kill me?" Vader was so stunned for a moment that he forgot to steer. Bright light flashed before him and he jerked his ship away from an exploding B-wing in the nick of time. He immediately put himself back on the tail of the X-wing, which curiously hadn't gone far. "You're surprised," Luke observed. "I have the feeling we're not seeing eye to eye."
"So it appears," Vader replied wryly, "but the responsibility may be mine."
Luke was pointedly silent as their ships wove around a Corellian gunship providing cover fire for the Quantum Storm, a poorly armed medium transport trying to distance itself from the Avengers' battery fire.
"I was wrong,"
Vader began, then faltered. He was not accustomed to apologizing. His only practice to date had been his desperate pleas of forgiveness to Padme, which were unheard, and his occasional apologies to his master, which were nothing more than superficial sugarcoating to keep the fragile peace. Now that he was trying to apologize to his son, truly meaning it with every fiber of his being, he found it perhaps the hardest thing he had ever done. Luke waited patiently for him to continue as they looped around the bridge of the Devastator. Vader tried again, knowing that this needed to be said right here, right now.
"I did not intend to injure you, Luke. I never meant to."
He faltered again as his mind abruptly catapulted light years back to Bespin, where Luke clung to the gantry where Vader had cornered him. Tormented by the image piercing his mind, he failed to sense the danger. Luke's alarmed mental shove jarred him back to the present, but too late, the turbo laser fire slammed into his tripod and sent him spinning out of control. "The cover fire's too heavy, Rogue 2. Both Vengeance and Conquest are guarding the interdictor." Wedge took a moment to consider as he jerked his ship aside to avoid an oncoming TIE bomber. "Then we'll have to take one of them down first," he replied to X2, the Grey Leader. "Maybe both." He fired on some fleeing TIE fighters while simultaneously spinning away from a stream of laser fire from a group of TIE interceptors chasing him. There was a series of explosions behind him. Someone had cleared his pursuers. "The Falcon," he realized as the modified freighter swooped past. "Thanks," Wedge said over the comm. "Our pleasure," Leia replied. "Has anyone seen Luke?" "He was being chased by Vader, Your Highness. We tried to help, but he told us to focus on the interdictor," Wedge said apologetically. He knew the two were close. There was the smallest fraction of a pause before Leia's authoritative voice replied, "He's right. We need to bring that Star Destroyer down and open up hyperspace." Wedge glanced at his scopes. "The Vengeance's shield generator looks more accessible. I suggest we target that first." I second that, Rogue 2, Leia confirmed. Great leader, take us in. All fighters on my mark, X2 prompted, and the ragtag group of a modified Corellian freighter, several X-Wings, an A-Wing, 2 B-Wings, and a dozen Y-Wings converged on the Star Destroyer. Father! Even as Vader struggled to regain control of his ship, Luke's concern warmed his heart as he eventually righted himself and most strangely found the X-Wing right in front of him again. He sent back,
I'm alright, son. The shields took the brunt.
His shields were down to 18%. It would hold if Vader paid attention. He forced himself to do so for Luke's sake as they ran the length of a veering Corellian frigate, exchanging fire with the Accuser dangerously close to the hull. This time his mind was in full control as he sent,
I am truly sorry, my son. I was wrong on Bespin.
The mental communication was loaded with remorse.
No matter how much I wish it, there is nothing I could do to change the past. But I will do everything in my power to make amends. I maintain the guise of loyalty to the Empire so that I can continue to assist you, but know that everything I do is for you.
For a brief moment he revealed himself in the Force to Luke. He let his son see into his mind and heart, devoid of any shielding, showing that he spoke the honest truth. Luke's shock radiated back to him. Vader quickly reformed his shield. Being open was never a clever ploy, even with Sidious such a great distance away.
As much as I am enjoying flying with you, Luke, we have little time left before you enter hyperspace. You should know that...
You may not have noticed, Luke interrupted, but there's the trifle matter of an interdictor that's making that rather tricky.
Never mind that, it will soon be disabled. Now, before you leave it...
Disabled? Really?
Yes, now...
But the shields are still...
Luke!
His son fell silent. Vader briefly wondered what it would have been like to raise him as a child. He would have treasured every moment of it.
I have taken care of it,
Vader said briefly.
The how does not matter. Now this is important. You must listen.
Mercifully, Luke remained quiet this time as they continued their mind-boggling maneuvers at breakneck speed through the lethal obstacle course.
I believe that one of the Emperor's hands has infiltrated the rebellion. He or she is most likely at the base here. They would be force-sensitive and an expert in espionage and assassination. I do not know yet whom he has sent, but you must be alert.
None too soon. Vader's comlink came to life.
Lord Vader,
this is Admiral Piet. Ion cannons are armed and primed on the rebel warships.
Good. Fire at will,
Vader commanded, then focused on Luke again.
Remember, my son, I am always here for you.
Hundreds of ion cannons' pulses boomed out from the executor. But immediately, it was obvious that something was wrong. The shots splayed out randomly, noticeably lacking any direction, even for a weapon not known for its high accuracy. The plasma pulses hit a few unfortunate fighters in their path, but otherwise missed anything of worth. Until several slammed a bullseye on the interdictor. Shocked disbelief radiated across the battlefield. All power failed on the Star Destroyer, and the immobilized capital warship gradually slanted towards the moon, helpless against its gravitational pull. Was that you? Vader heard from his incredulous son.
Never mind that. Go, before I have to drag you in with a tractor beam.
Nobody needed to be told that the gravity well projectors had been incapacitated. Rebel ships were rapidly jumping to light speed, trying to make good their escape before someone restored the interdictor's functionality.
Admiral,
Vader boomed over the comm as he broke away from Luke and made a beeline back toward his flagship.
Secure the interdictor with tractor beams. Order Imperial craft to return to host and focus all firepower on the fleeing rebel ships.
Yes, my lord, Piet acknowledged, for once sounding flustered. The mission was rapidly turning into a disaster, and he feared sharing his predecessor's fate. Father, came a tentative mental call from his son as all the Star Destroyers brought their collective arsenal to bear on the quickly emptying battlefield, lighting up space with deadly, brilliant fireworks. Are you still here? There was a pause. Then, softly, thank you. Vader immediately regretted his terse response, but before he could reply, Luke's bright presence vanished as the X-Wing jumped to light speed. The darkness in the Force that instantly descended onto Vader was suffocating, so thick that it was almost tactile, and he wondered how he could have lived for so long without his son. The simple answer was that He hadn't. He had existed, but never lived. It was only now that he had come alive. Luke! Leia! He said into a mouthful of brown hair as he caught her in his arms. Then he started laughing when huge, hairy arms picked them both up with a joyful howl. Hey, Chewie! After Chewbacca released them, Leia clung to him fiercely for another brief second before letting him go and gave him a half-playful, half-serious punch on the arm. Don't scare me like that! I'm sorry, he said. There was a glitch in the hyperdrive. It dropped me off short. Luckily, the R5 unit managed to convince it to do another short leap to bring us in closer before it backed up altogether. You had us worried when you didn't show up at the rendezvous after being chased by Vader and you didn't even have R2 with you. Leia trailed off. A strange mixture of emotions washed over him at the mention of his father, but he pushed them aside. He couldn't talk about that, not just yet. But he could reassure her. I'm here now, he said, sending soothing waves with the Force. She gave him a small smile. Is this a bad time? Came a hesitant voice from the side. Not at all, it's fine, Cara, Leia said, waving her over. Luke, I want you to meet Cara. She was a great help in the evacuation. Lando said she was a terrific co-pilot. Luke didn't hear another word. Blue eyes met brilliant emerald green, and he lost the ability to speak. Long, flame-red hair tumbled about her heart-shaped face and cascaded down past her shoulders. There was an innate strength in her stance, a no-nonsense attitude. Their respective energies merged, polar opposites and yet perfect in harmony. Polar opposites and yet in perfect harmony. Her ferocity complementing his serenity. The Force swirled between and around them, charged by the significance of the moment. He was spellbound. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, so vibrantly alive. Hi, he said, the word barely making it past his numb lips. Hi, the woman said, equally inarticulate. They fell silent again. Beside them, Leia coughed discreetly. They jumped, breaking eye contact as they realized that they had been staring at each other. Luke cleared his throat and Cara adopted a rather aloof expression. By the warm feeling on his face and neck, Luke knew that he must be wearing the same blush as her. Luke, this is Cara, Leia said again, assuming correctly that he hadn't heard a word. Cara, Luke Skywalker. Well, sir, it's a pleasure to meet you, Cara said, her tone coolly civil. Likewise, Cara, and just call me Luke. Luke, she muttered, almost reluctantly. There was an awkward pause, then she turned to Leia. I need to be going, Your Highness. The deck officer needed details of the available starfighters, she said, and then sauntered away. Leia appeared to be on the verge of a question, but Luke avoided her amused, curious gaze and deliberately changed the subject. How's R2? Is he all fixed? His spunky droid had been most embarrassed when he had accidentally plugged himself into a highly charged conduit which short-fused many of his circuits. Most of the repairs had been completed while Luke was away on Dagobah, but they hadn't been able to reattach his links in time for the loyal droid to accompany him in the sudden evacuation. The Wookiee howled and gestured with his arms. Chewie was just fixing him, Leia supplied, thankfully dropping the issue about Cara. He should be ready by your next flight. Thanks, Chewie, Luke said. His hairy friend gave another howl, then loped off to continue working on the astromech droid. Now just the two of them. Luke's face turned grave. Was it bad? She knew what he was asking. It could have been so much worse. The money price is too high. Most of the casualties were pilots. I'm sorry, Luke, we lost Kier Santaj. He nodded numbly. Rogue 7 had been a good pilot, demonstrating unquestionable loyalty to the Alliance since being rescued from an Imperial detention center. Luke tried to remind himself that Kier would return to the living force, as would the others who had lost their lives, but it was little consolation. We'll remember them, he promised grimly. She nodded, sharing the sentiment. It was a sad fact of their lives that they could rarely take the time to properly mourn their fallen comrades, but the Alliance never forgot those who had given their lives for freedom. Mon wants to see you when she arrives in a few hours, she said as she led him towards the large doors. She was asking if your recent trip revealed anything on Varikino's intentions. There was a distinct bitterness in her tone at the pseudonym. Luke nodded. Of course. He looked around to make sure they weren't being overheard and dropped his voice. Can we talk? She threw him a curious look. I'll show you to your quarters. Luke followed her out of the hangar. They were on a Mon Calamari cruiser in the fleet, where the Alliance High Command had temporarily based, their next ground-based headquarters having not been established yet. They said little as they traversed the brightly lit corridors. It was a given that people would stand by to allow one of the Alliance leaders to pass, but Luke noticed with alarm that they were now staring at him with renewed awe, and some even gave him small bows. He hid his discomfort as he nodded back politely. As soon as they reached his new rooms and the door closed them off from the corridor, he scrunched up his face and slapped a hand on his forehead. Okay, what did I do this time? Leia laughed. In rare moments like this, he reminded her of the younger man, a boy, really, whom she had met on the Death Star. You saved the Alliance yet again, she said lightly as she settled herself in the only chair in the room. You told us about the Imperial fleet, remember? He groaned. Just when he thought things were calming down after Bespin! Why did you tell them it was me? Her eyes twinkled in mirth. Oh, it wasn't me. Word had already spread by the time High Command was alerted. It must have been that controller I spoke to, he muttered as he grabbed a bundle of clothes and headed into the fresher. Apparently you had a Jedi premonition? Her voice floated teasingly after him. I never said anything of the sort, he protested, his voice muffled through the thin door. I heard you didn't say anything at all. Word is, you just knew. Halfway out of his jumpsuit, Luke squirmed uncomfortably. Yes, about that. Leia didn't like that tone. She stared at the closed refresher door until Luke emerged in his dark Jedi robes. Yes, about that? She prompted. Even with the calm, collected demeanor of his Jedi training, he wanted to shift his feet under her sharp scrutiny. Try to stay calm, okay? He said. That only made her more nervous. Just tell me, Luke. Once he had swept the room with his force sense to check nobody was eavesdropping, he said, Vader told me. Her face was a picture of incomprehension. Come again? She asked eventually. Vader. Luke stared through the opposite wall, as if he was miles away. When I returned from... He stops himself just in time. Yoda had to remain a secret for the safety of everyone concerned. When I returned, he amended, Vader contacted me. He calmed you? She asked. Her face had become an expressionless mask, the Princess Leia look that she had developed through her royal upbringing and perfected in her year's tenure as the Senator of Alderaan. He shook his head. You know, when I called to you on Bespin, when you could almost hear me? It's like that. Except between Force Adepts, we can also communicate with words. He told me that he had briefly stalled the fleet at Taprara, that we had under half an hour to evacuate. She raised a perfectly arched brow. It's true, he insisted. I don't doubt you for a second. What I'm dubious about is why he would warn you. Of course that question would come up. Stupidly, Luke hadn't prepared to answer it, and he said the only thing he could think of. The truth, to a point. He cited personal reasons. Such as using us to overthrow Palpatine so he can take over the Empire himself, Leia retorted. That possibility hadn't occurred to him, and it made him hesitate. What did Vader want? To make amends, his father had said. But what exactly did that entail? In their crazy flight above Yavin 13, there hadn't been time to ask. He made a mental note to bring it up next time. What he did know, with absolute certainty, however, was that Vader cared for his son. It had been a huge shock when Vader had suddenly removed his impenetrable layers of mental shielding and let Luke see deep into his heart. Darkness still resided there, but eclipsing everything was his love for his son. Luke had been completely overwhelmed with joy. Whatever his feelings regarding his father, however difficult it was to grasp the polar duality of the murderous Vader from Bespin and the fatherly Vader he had flown with almost the day before, he knew that the Dark Lord would not harm him. At least, not anymore, not intentionally. If taking over the Empire did happen to be in Vader's plans for making amends to his son, then Luke was sure he could convince him otherwise. I think we should accept the Nebulon B frigates, he said quietly. Because he warned us he was about to raid our base? Luke, if he honestly supported us, then why did he come at all? Palpatine gave him our location. Vader had no choice. If he was found out, that he wouldn't be in a position to help us anymore. She frowned. You believe him then? There's just too many things he's done for us now. It's more unlikely that he's not trying to help us. For whatever reason, I think he's genuinely trying to support our cause. She didn't seem convinced. Vader had been the enemy for too long, and with good reason, one of which was extremely personal. Luke steered his thoughts away from that painful subject and focused on giving her the other pieces of the puzzle. He warned me that one of the Emperor's hands had infiltrated the base, which was how they knew where we were. He or she is force-sensitive, highly dangerous. We need to be on guard. He knew Leia was wondering what possible reason Vader could have for learning them. He stared right into her eyes. There's more, but you can't tell anyone this. Luke, if there's a danger to the Alliance, she started, but he interrupted. No, it's nothing like that. We just need to make sure that this hand doesn't get wind of it. From the Empire's point of view, it's even worse than the rest. Promise me? She nodded after a moment's consideration. I think he sabotaged the Executor's ion cannons. She stared at him as if he had suddenly grown a second head. I know, it's crazy, he agreed, throwing up his hands. But he told me that the interdictor would be disabled. He said, I have taken care of it. He said that? Luke nodded. And then it happened. But he wasn't even on board the Executor. Yes, I know, he was right behind me the whole time. But he knew it would happen, and he also knew the exact timing. If he didn't perpetrate the ion cannon failure, then he at least allowed it to happen. He let us escape. Leia expelled a big sigh. I don't even know what to think. Sabotaging his own mission? It's on a whole new level from giving us money and warships. And, added Luke, the entire time he was chasing me, he didn't once shoot at me. She stared at him wide-eyed for a moment, then shook her head. None of this makes sense. Why? She leapt up and started pacing the room, her brow furrowed into a great frown. Why? It's not like him at all. For something to drive him to behave so out of character, it has to be something important, something critical. This was it, the moment of truth. He would tell her and everything would change. He inhaled, opened his mouth. Vader waited, as still as a statue, as he knelt with his head bowed. He had lost count of the seconds a while ago, somewhere around the 15-minute mark, as Sidious made a great show of perusing the report that he had already read. Vader used the time to form yet another layer of tight shielding around his already heavily shielded mind, molding and perfecting it with care before forming yet another layer. Having been ordered back to Imperial Center, he knew there was nothing he could do to prevent the inevitable. But whatever his fate, his master must not find out. Sidious finally tired of making him wait and revolved on his throne to face his servant. His face was a hideous visage of rage. Your spectacular failure astounds me, he spat. I gave you the rebellion on a silver platter, and not only did you fail to capture Skywalker, but you did not even capture a single rebel.
Master, that was a catastrophic failure.
Yes, Sidious sneered mockingly. The rebels had already evacuated. They detonated the base, and the ion cannon array failed. Fury swept across his face. Your report is full of excuses. The Emperor rose from his throne. The air around them crackled as he slowly descended the steps toward his still kneeling apprentice. You failed me, Lord Vader, he snarled, seething with contempt, gnarled fingers raised to point at his servant. Vader braced himself. The scream still erupted from his throat as the force lightning tore violently into him. On and on, without mercy, without reprieve. Over the years, Sidious had developed the horrifying ability to accurately direct the force lightning, inflicting pain to living parts of his body whilst avoiding the electrical circuits of his life support suit. As the terrible energy poured into him, Vader protected his love for his son for as long as he could, but eventually the pain became too much, consumed him, and he forgot all else. Fury billowed out in thunderous clouds, a giant whirlwind with Vader in the eye of the storm. Sidious sneered in cruel satisfaction as he sent forth the last bolt of lightning.
Since Bespin, Vader hadn't quite been himself, seeming troubled by his encounter with his son, but whatever had ailed him, whatever had softened and weakened him, had now been expelled. His formidable apprentice had returned. Sidious turned his back on the near-unconscious body and departed from the private throne room, his mind already focusing on other matters. Excruciating pain saturated every living cell in Vader's body, magnifying his wrath, dark and corruptive. The dark side swelled within him, intensifying, overwhelming him. Blind with rage, he reached for the reason for all his agony. Light years away, the words died in Luke's mouth as he gasped, pain shooting through him. His whole body shuddered, his limbs trembled, all his muscles seized up. He felt intense, burning pain. Then a familiar brush against his mind. Vader felt his son's presence and sent forth his blazing fury, swelling and billowing into the ultimate pinnacle. A dark, raging inferno. "Father!" Luke cried out desperately. "Father!" And abruptly the dark side dissipated. Gradually, as if waking from a deep sleep, it registered that somebody was calling his name. It was faint, as if from a great distance, but then it became louder, and louder, much louder, until it was deafening. He groaned. "Luke!" Leia. He would know her voice anywhere. "Shh," he murmured. "Too loud." "Luke, what happened? What's wrong?" Thankfully, she was quieter now, but still sounded desperately worried. He made an unintelligible sound as he opened his eyes. The pain was easing rapidly, and in seconds there was nothing. Other than the adrenaline surging through his veins, he felt fine. He sat up. "I'm fine," he said in confusion as he wondered how he had ended up lying on the floor. Then his brain caught up with him, and he remembered. His father in great pain, the dark side surging. No! That wasn't the Vader who had let them escape earlier, or even the Vader he had faced on Bespin. It was a Vader wholly immersed in the dark side. There was no regard for his son, only eternal darkness, twisted hate. Not even a day ago, Luke thought they had connected on some level, if only for a few brief minutes as they flew together. Had he lost his father again already? Were they worlds apart again? His memory stirred. Just before he lost consciousness, something had changed. Did the terrible evil recede? Or had he imagined that? He couldn't be sure. He closed his eyes, unable to bear the thought of losing his father again when they had only just found each other. He had to see him. Somehow, he had to see his father. Vader collapsed as the door hissed shut. It had been a torturous walk to his shuttle, trying to mask the pain with every agonizing step. Fortunately, the pilots assigned to his personal shuttle were accustomed to his dark moods and thought nothing of their uncommunicative commander. They were competent enough to know when he wished to return to the executor without being instructive. Luke. Yet again, he was overcome with remorse. At the height of the pain, he had reached out to the only good thing in his life. He had reached for his precious son, had directed his terrible rage at him. Sitting on the floor in his private cabin, he clutched his helmeted head in his hands. What his son must think of him now. He knew Luke had saved him. The boy had called out to him as he teetered on the brink, taming his wild fury with a single word, dragged him back from the pivotal moment of being utterly lost to the dark side without conscious thought or free will. He had to reassure Luke that it was still him, the same father who had vowed to make amends. He reached out again, tenderly this time, stretched out his senses. But try as he might, his present connection with the Force was too tenuous to bridge the vast distance separating them. He remained on the fringes of the dark side, unable to bring himself to fully grasp the vile energy. This couldn't go on. He wouldn't keep hurting his son every time the dark side took over. He had thought that he could make things right. He so desperately wanted to. But something had to change. He knew that now. For the very first time in his entire existence as Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Vader dared to look where he dared not go. With an almost shy, sidelong glance, he looked to the light side of the Force. Peace! How peaceful! The calm, serene flow of energy soothed his tormented soul, a warm breath of life that chased away the shadows of despair encroaching on his troubled mind. It was enriching and so familiar, like a long-lost friend. It gave hope, it gave life.
Stirred by the long-forgotten feeling of the pure living force, faces he had either forgotten over time or buried deep in the darkest recesses of his mind now drifted into his vision. His dear mother, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and his beautiful, beloved angel. Tears pricked his eyes. And then Anakin. He reeled, shuddering back to reality. Suddenly, it was so brutally clear. Anakin Skywalker, legendary Jedi Knight, guardian of peace and justice, husband and father. Darth Vader, terrifying Dark Lord, herald of doom, murderer of younglings. He froze, horror-struck, as he realized what he had become.